Hello, my name is Mariatta, and I'm joining you today virtually from Vancouver, Canada. Thank you so much, PyCon Australia, for including my talk in your program, and thank you for all of you for joining and watching my talk. I am a Python core developer. What does it really mean? What is even a Python core developer? It means that if you have a pull request to Python programming language, then I can merge it for you if I want. Basically, I have the commit privilege to CPython. So I am one of the maintainers of one of the most popular programming language and open source projects out there. And for my contributions to Python, I've received recognitions such as the PSF Community Service Award in 2018. I've also been nominated twice for Google Open Source Peer Bonus, and I've been featured as one of the maintainers for GitHub Sponsors program. The thing is, I'm new at this. I've really only started contributing to open source quite recently. My first ever contribution to open source was in 2016. That was only 4 years ago. Since then, I've continued actively contributing to open source projects, and somehow I ended up with being given commit rights to other people's open source projects. And all of a sudden, I felt like I have a set of new responsibilities, and I wasn't fully prepared for it all. So in this talk, I want to share just my journey. How did I get here? How did it happen? Wanted to share what it's like as a brand new open source maintainer. I also want to share some of the mistakes that I've made, some of the lessons I've learned, and I want to share why I've actually continued in this path, why I've continued contributing to open source projects. What I hope by sharing my story is whether you're an aspiring open source contributor or you're an experienced open source maintainer, I hope you could do this all much better than me. So how did this happen? Like, a lot of people been asking me how to even get started contributing to open source. And people wanted to know if I have any tips or secrets to share. And I'm actually glad to hear your enthusiasm into getting to open source. But the thing is, for me, it really happened suddenly. Like, one day I was just making my first pull request in 2016. By the end of the year, I get commit rights to 2 projects. And shortly after that, I got the commit right to CPython. And since then, I've kept it up, and I'm now a member of various open source projects. But let's backtrack a little bit. The real question people had in mind is that what motivated me into contributing to open source? Like, if I've been a long time user of Python, why did I all of a sudden I became inspired to start contributing and to give back? So this is a long story. It actually began in 2015 when I attended PyCon in Montreal. And I actually received financial aid from PyLadies for it. But it was my first ever PyCon, and I went to Guido van Rossum's keynote. Guido is the creator of Python. So in his keynote back then, he talked about how in the Python core team, there was no women at all. Like, he had just attended Python Language Summit at PyCon. It was a room of 50 men, no women at all, and then he offered to mentor women into contributing to Python. And when I heard this, I was shocked. It just didn't make sense. It felt wrong. But back then, I didn't really do anything about this. I mean, at that time, I was starting to become curious, like how could this happen, and why is there, for 20 years, there have been no female in the team? I was curious about it, but back then, at the same time, I just didn't think it's my problem. Like, I thought that, well, it's Python's problem, not mine. Like, I felt like there was nothing I could do about it. So a year later, I went back to PyCon. Again, I received financial aid from PyLadies. And honestly, when I returned the second year, I was kind of hoping to hear like about the new women Python core developers. But instead, Guido admitted that there was still no women in the team, and he renewed his offer that he was willing to mentor even more women. And that's when it really hit me, that there is a problem here, and it wasn't technical problem. Like there is a real barrier. There is a barrier in the open source community that for 20 years that Python has existed, most of the contributors are men, and there's been no women as maintainers. So there is a diversity problem here. And if before I had thought that it's not my problem, this time I realized for myself that this is a problem that I care about, and I wanted to do something about it, even though I didn't quite know what exactly I could even do. Like I could just complain. I could just point fingers and say, hey, you Python, you have diversity problem and you gotta fix it. Like I could do that. But I didn't think that's going to be productive. So from then on, I thought that maybe I could just give this a try. Maybe even if it's a small way, I thought maybe I could help improve this situation, and I could start contributing to Python and open source. So I wrote an email to Guido van Rossum and asked for mentorship. And it was very scary for me to write such email, but I felt lucky that he replied, and so I asked for his advice. I told him I've never really actively contributed to any open source project before. So here are some of the early advice that he gave me. First, he suggested that I should focus on modules that I found interesting. And then I should check out the repository and check out the contribution guide. And if I have trouble following the contribution guide, it means the documentation is not clear enough, then I should just start by helping and improve the documentation. He suggested that I check out the bug tracker and look at open issues. But there were like 4,000 open issues or something like that. Additionally, he suggested that I should introduce myself to the mailing list, and here he really meant the Python core mentorship mailing list, okay? Not the Python dev mailing list. Please do not write an email to Python dev just for introducing yourself. Not the right mailing list. Thing is, even now, sending an email to any of the Python mailing list is scary. So I understand if you're reluctant to write to the mailing list. If you're just a lurker, I understand that. But initially, the thing is, I didn't find the CPython projects too interesting. I followed his advice. I checked out the bug tracker, but just nothing made sense. I felt like I had nothing to contribute to this project, and I didn't feel like I could ever help with anything at all. But so I started thinking more broadly. If I couldn't contribute to Python, perhaps I could try contributing to some other projects. And I started thinking perhaps it would be even easier if it's a project where I have some familiarity, where instead of trying to learn a brand new strange code base, I could just make use of an existing skills that I already have. And that's when I shifted my attention to the python.org project. Python.org is an open source project built with Django, like something that I was familiar with. I was a backend engineer back then. So I checked out the codebase, and unlike of looking at CPython codebase, I felt at home this time. I felt like things make sense. And instead of feeling intimidated, I feel like I can be valuable to the project, that I can contribute something. I know how to create pull requests to Python.org website. However, Guido doesn't actually know how to further help me with, Python.org or even with Django. So then I was on my own from there on. And but the advice still stands. Whether I'm contributing to CPython or any project, one of the first steps is check out the code base, check out the repo, read the contribution guide, and if it doesn't exist or it's not complete or not up to date, I could just go ahead and start improving the documentation. So now that I found a project that I could contribute to, and in my mind, all I was thinking about, like, quick, look at the issue tracker, find an open issue that I can work on. And I was looking at the issue tracker, but the thing is, over time I've learned this. Over time I realized that all I needed to do is just wait. Sometimes the thing that I can help with, the things that I can implement, hasn't been reported. So instead, I have to watch the repository, like subscribe, and get notified for new tickets that comes in. And additionally, while waiting for that, instead of fixating on trying to create pull requests, I started checking out and reviewing the existing open issues. So even if it's the issue that I wasn't familiar with, I would just join in the discussions. I would be asking more, like, clarifying questions. Sometimes I would just help verify that, yes, this issue is still persisting, or maybe, this is a languishing issue, or it's been fixed, we just forgot to close it or something like that. And that's what I started doing more. And indeed, that's actually how I was given the commit right to the Koala project and to the Python.org website. It wasn't because I made hundreds of pull requests, but because of my activity. I wasn't just writing code. I help with documentation. I help with issue triaging. And I think the maintainers noticed my activity there. And I think they saw that I care about this project just as much as they do. And then that's how they decided that they could trust me and give me the commit privilege. Now, what about the advice about introducing yourself to the mailing list? So I think it depends. For some projects, they might have a Gitter or Slack channel or Discord or Discourse or whatever, where some projects have a dedicated channel where you can introduce, like, as a new member, you can come in and say hi and introduce yourself. So if I found that such project has such channel, I would do it. I would introduce and I tell them that I'm a new contributor to this project. What I also did at that time, I was attending a lot of conferences. And if I know that the project maintainer of the project that I'm interested in is also there, maybe they are speaking as well, or they're leading a sprint, I would try to find them and introduce myself just to let them know that I'm a new contributor to their project. And I think that's really helped, and I found it useful for myself just to know them. And as I've gotten more active in the open source, I realized that becoming a contributor to a project is pretty much like starting as a new developer joining a new tech company. So when you start at a new job, the first few days or maybe even weeks, you'll be in an onboarding and training sessions most likely, and perhaps there's a senior engineer assigned to mentor you and give you a walkthrough of the code base and everything. And after that, you get assigned a small task, and eventually you get more familiarized with the code base, and then you can start implementing big features on your own without help. Being a new contributor to a new open source project is no difference than being a new developer at a company. It probably will take you time to understand the code base and the workflow before you can make that substantial feature or bug fix. The biggest difference here is that in open source, usually there is no assigned mentor to help you or to walk you through the code base. Even till now, Guido has never given me a walkthrough of the CPython code base, never. And I can't expect him to do this. And this is one of the things you have to do this on your own. Or all you can do is just really ask for specific questions about that specific part of the code base. You can't just be asking, where do I start? Nobody knows where you should start. It's really up to you. And instead of spending full time of training to get familiarized with the project, you would be doing this in whatever free time you have available. It will take time for you to learn a new code base of a new open source project. And you need to take the time to learn. So it will not be a day or two. CPython codebase is almost 30 years old. It's older than some legacy codebase even in the startups. Okay, so it will take time to learn before you can contribute to Python. And just 1 second here. And contributing is really more than find an issue and then make code changes. It is also about becoming part of the team and joining the discussion forum and participate in the discussions. I think I find that new contributors are fixating or focusing on looking at open issues and think about how they can write code. But I think you should really think broader than that. You can't be fixating on code and issues and ignore the rest. So now let me tell you what happened when the first time I became a maintainer. All of a sudden, I found myself receiving lots of emails because all of a sudden I got automatically added to the repos within the organization. Like now I have write privileges to various repositories. And even until now, I'm still trying to figure out how to manage my emails properly. I have set up Gmail filters. I think my email is somewhat more manageable now, but still every few days, I found myself go to my inbox and look at the number of unread emails, hundreds of them, and I would just close my eyes and said I don't care, just mark all of this as read. that's what I would do. That's my secret. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I missed your emails. And my GitHub notifications, I've given up on that. I've learned to ignore it. So I don't look at my GitHub notifications. And as the maintainer of the new project, I found myself now needing to make decisions, and I need to decide whether this pull request needs to be merged or rejected. And just because the test passed, just because I see the merge button really doesn't mean I have to accept it. especially with a large project like CPython. Often we have to think about the long-term maintenance burden of accepting a pull request, and we also need to think about how this change will impact the rest of Python users. Because maybe the contributor created a PR because they need it for themselves, but it doesn't mean the rest of the Python wants this same feature. So I have had to reject lots of issues and pull requests and simply have to tell them that this is not suitable for Python. Like maybe you should write your own package or something. And most of the time, people are okay with my decision. They accepted it. But sometimes they would come back and argue for more. And that's just one of those things I didn't realize I have had to endure. I also didn't realize that in addition to owning a project, reviewing pull requests, and so on, project maintainers now have to deal with things like code of conduct enforcement, or they also have to moderate their communication channels. And it's not actually an easy thing to do. I've been in code of conduct committee before, and I have also been the one who have to report incidents that happened to me. The thing is, it's handling code of conduct, moderating is hard. It's absolutely emotionally draining. I don't think open source maintainers have to deal with this. They have enough responsibilities. And also, what happens if the person who are being offensive is one of the maintainers? Like, what do you do if the maintainers are the one who were offensive? So I really think code of conduct committee should be a separate body than the maintainers. For projects or a community that is large enough, like Python, it's possible, like we can recruit people from within community and form a specialized code of conduct team. But many open source projects are run by one or two people, and if it's not the maintainer who handles this, then who? I think that's one of the problems within the open source community. And on top of all those responsibilities, one of the roles that I didn't realize that a maintainer has to do is they become a representative of the project, like kind of becoming a spokesperson for the project. Like I found myself, I'm no longer speaking or acting just for myself, but on behalf of the community. How I act, how I behave becomes a reflection of the communities I belong to. And I've made some mistakes. I made some mistakes, definitely. One of the biggest mistakes I did was making big decisions on my own. And by big, I meant like I blocked a user from the org, kind of big. Seriously, when you block someone, you're rejecting them from your community. You're denying their involvement. So blocking, banning a user is very serious punishment. So, and this happened not in Python, but in one of the smaller communities that I was in. The person made an inappropriate pull request. I think it was disrespectful, and I didn't want to trouble the rest of the community having to deal or continue interacting with this one person. So I went ahead and blocked the account. The mistake is that this it's not the kind of decision that I should have made on my own. I should at least be discussed with my core maintainers. I should have followed the procedure and at least let the team know that there is a problematic member and we need to do something about it. Rest assured, I'm a better person now. I know what to do. I am familiar with code of conduct enforcements, and I do try my best to follow the procedure. But one of the biggest mistakes I've made ever was really not managing my time wisely. A lot of people wondered, how do I even manage my time in my life? How do I have my work, life, and volunteer balance? I don't know. I still don't know how I balance things. My life is not balanced. I didn't have my priorities in the right order. A few years ago, instead of attending my kids' school performance, I was in another country attending a Python conference. Last year, instead of being with my family for Thanksgiving dinner, I was at yet another Python conference. And I wasn't setting boundaries and rules for myself. I was giving too much time and energy to open source. And in the end, I had burned out. I went through mental health issues. There was a time I had to take a month off from work in order to recharge and reset my priorities. But despite all of that, despite all the troubles that I've endured, I'm still here. I'm still actively contributing to open source, and I've continued saying yes to help maintaining other open source projects, most recently for GitHub and for the PyLadies project. So why do I continue doing this? Believe it or not, if I contribute actively to a project to the point of being given commit, it's really because I do care about it. Working openly in open source is a unique opportunity. It's a very different environment. It's a very different environment than working in a for-profit company. I get exposed to unique challenges not normally faced at work. I get to learn about new libraries that people are building, and I get to play with those and use those learnings way faster than at work. For example, in my workplace, we were still using Python 2. Yes, we upgraded now, but we did it quite recently this year, in the year 2020. But when I'm in open source, when I build my open source projects, I've been using F strings from Python 3.6 for years. So that's one of the things that I valued in the open source when working in open source. And I've really gained a lot from the community. Not only that I've continuously learning, but I receive rewards, I receive recognitions, I receive lots of opportunities to travel and see the world, and those are valuable to me. And I felt I just have that sense of responsibility to give back. And when I attended Peter Wang's keynote at PyCon in Germany last year, he was talking about open source community. And one of the things that he said was that in open source, the more you give, the more you get back. And I found it really resonate with me a lot. Another reason why I'm continuing is that almost immediately when I first started, I found acceptance within the community. When I first emailed Guido and asked for his help, I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to give a resume. I didn't have to go to day-long on-site interview in order to become a Python core developer. when I requested financial aid to attend conference, all I needed to do was just ask. And somehow the community has accepted me. And for once in a long time, I have this sense of belonging. And I realized that this community is important to me. So that's my story. Now that you've learned about my journey, how I got here, I do have a few more words of advice for all of you aspiring open source contributors and maintainers. First of all, when you were extended invitation to collaborate and maintain an open source project, ask, what is their expectation of you? Establish boundaries and rules, if any. For example, when I first given the right access to python.org, I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing there. So I asked the person who invited me, like, was this a mistake? Why are you giving me this right access? What do you expect out of me? And I asked if there's anything I need to do differently now that I have the commit, right? So, and I think it was great that I asked, because they clarified that, okay, for the first few months, I shouldn't try merging everything by myself until at least another maintainer also reviewed it. So that was great, and it gives me a sense of what I could or could not do. I found that many open source projects have really great contributing guide, which is a documentation to help aimed for the new contributors to help them get started contributing. But at the same time, those projects don't have maintenance guide. There is no new maintainer onboarding guide. And perhaps the thinking is that if somebody has contributed long enough to a project, maybe they know about everything already, so there is no need to have a maintenance guide. But maintaining a project is not the same as contributing. And as I've described earlier in this talk, there are additional responsibilities and powers. So, if a project doesn't yet have the maintenance guide, I think you should start one, and you can start documenting as you learn, as you get onboarded. For example, in my experience, what I found is that we would give the new maintainer right access to the GitHub repo, just the repo. But what if the project uses things like third-party services like read the docs to build the documentation, or use Netlify, or if they need to release a package to PyPI? Like, those things require additional access rights. Those things are important and relevant to maintaining the project, so those needs to be documented somewhere. And feels like this should be obvious, but projects really should have succession plan in place. Perhaps there is an unwritten expectation that maintainers would be around in the project for a long time. I've only been in open source for a few years. In my short time, I have seen various maintainers come and go. And sometimes it's not even about maintainers who completely retired. I'm talking about people who just need standard time off, or maybe they're starting a new family, starting a new job, have family emergency or something like that, or they just wanna take a half year off biking around Europe or something like that. It could happen, and it could happen anytime and suddenly. There shouldn't be an aspect of the project that is owned by only one person. So, for example, if you do have a package in PyPI, make sure you have a collaborator who can release the package for you when you're not able to. So, I know that many open source projects maintainers, they come to conferences and they would host sprints and help new contributors to contribute to their project. I think that's great, but I would recommend, in addition to that, do an annual sprint for the maintainers and for the experienced contributors. And perhaps you just have to see how often you want to do this based on your project. For example, the Python team, we have an annual Python core developer sprint where for one whole week we have a focus time to implement features. We will have synchronous discussions and collaborations. And the difference with this sprint is, instead of helping someone new, we'll be really focused on building and pushing issues to complete to the finish line. And just as a comparison, like even remote companies where I work at, and I know many remote companies do, even if they've been working remotely, distributedly for the whole year, they find value in meeting in person once or twice a year. But, well, of course, not during the pandemic. But they see value in meeting on site. I think open source project is no different. So even if you can't physically meet, you can organize a virtual sprint. So something like take a few days off from work and focus and hack on your open source project. I think that will be useful for the continuity of your project. Now, I know that there are some open source maintainers who got their company to support them. I know that there are companies that gives their employee time to work in open source. But most of us, like myself, we do this for free. I don't get paid to contribute to open source, and perhaps it's a reality. Perhaps you're even okay with this. But getting funding for your project doesn't hurt. Money makes things happen. Or maybe you need some funding to help pay for private GitHub repo or something, or you need to pay for web hosting, need a better computer, or need a license for your IDE or something. But even if you don't need any of that, money is a great reward for your contributions to open source. Your work in open source provides value to people. Would be nice to get paid for it. And there are lots of options out there to help fund your open source projects. There is GitHub Sponsors Program, there's TideLive, Patreon, and Mozilla Open Source Grants. So look into one of those. And above all, do take care of yourself. Remember what your priorities are. Take time off from your project if you need it, and don't feel guilty about it. And if you have written the maintenance guide and you have succession plan in place, I'm sure you'll feel at ease leaving your project to your co-maintainers. I know you will be able to trust them while you take the time to recharge. So that's my talk. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again, PyCon Australia, for including me. If you like to get in touch, you can find me on Twitter as Mariatta. And if you find value in my open source contributions, I hope you'd consider becoming my sponsor on GitHub. Thank you so much.